Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5 Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about why you should have low expectations when it comes to priests. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio, et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Now some of you be like, Gregory, what? We should have low expectations? Well, hear me out. One way to look at life is if you always have low expectations, you're either going to be pleasantly surprised when things are better than what you expected, or when things are pretty low, you'll be like, well, that's what I expected. Like when you're going in to see a bad movie, for example. And so I think the opposite of just having high expectations all the time in every aspect of your life means you're going to be disappointed, and sometimes that disappointment can lead to disillusionment, and sometimes that can lead to just a complete abandonment of something. And I think a better mindset to have is have low expectations. In particular to the clergy, I think it's good to have lower expectations than higher expectations, because the clergy are like us. They're human and they make mistakes. And if you pedestalize people, whether it be your wife, whether it be the president, whether it be people in power, you're bound to be disappointed. You see this with politicians all the time, right? One of them has a sex scandal, or one of them does something, that embezzlement or something, and then you're just crushed. Or like a celebrity athlete or a celebrity, and you find out that they had a pretty sordid life and you're just crushed. And I just think in general, it's better to have, I would say moderate expectations, but moderate expectations is kind of like porridge. It's one of those things that's kind of hard to gauge. It's easier to gauge the extremes. So when it comes to priests, the reason I tell you to have low expectations is because you have to kind of have this understanding that there are a lot of bad priests out there. And this is not to cast aspersions on priests. I think what they're doing is amazing. It is a vocation that, unlike the Protestants, where if somebody feels that they have the gift of the gab and the gift of preaching, I'm going to start my church, and then it goes from there. When it comes to Catholic priests, it is truly a vocation, and we've talked about ways to correct sermons and homiletics. They're not always gifted in homiletics. But I think that the role of a priest, of course, is needed. Obviously, we need it to run the church, to run our parishes, to confect the sacraments, all these things that we need. But I think if you go in with the idea that the priest is flawed and might make poor decisions, I think it's a better course of action to have, because if and when they let you down, you're not going to be devastated. And sometimes people are devastated to the point where they leave the church. And I mean, this could be applied to Protestants, right? You have a pastor at some mega church or whatever, and you find out that they did something that was disappointing to you, and you leave and you're crushed. And you might even leave that denomination because you see like one shepherd failing as being emblematic of some institution when it's just one person failing. And I would tell you too, look, we've talked about it here, we have episodes here, and I think priests would even agree with what I'm saying, because they know priests, they know a lot of priests, they got to go to conferences all the time. They would agree with me as well. They know that there are some priests that shouldn't be priests. And so I talked about it here, like signs that you have, let's say, a modernist pastor. Signs when you walk into a church if it's run by a modernist pastor. And I think that when it comes to priests, you have to understand, look, some priests don't know the faith well. They just don't know the faith well. And this has always been a problem in the history of the church. And we've had reforms. The Cluniac reforms back in the 11th century, for example. We had more reforms in the 16th century during the Council of Trent. We just constantly trying to improve the seminaries because it's important. As being the shepherds of the faith, it would make sense that our priests be pretty well educated and well catechized on the faith. And certainly now they spend several years in the seminary and learning post-seminary as well. But you will find priests that don't know the faith well. You will find priests that you might know the faith better than they will. And you're going to find priests that give bad pastoral advice, whether it be telling normally this will be behind the scenes. This would rarely ever be from the pulpit, but the contraception's okay. That abortion, maybe it's a nuanced thing. They might tell divorced people who are cohabiting to receive the Eucharist, and they could be giving this advice, and they could be material heretics. We've talked about the difference between a formal and material heretic. They could theoretically be one that just doesn't know the teaching of the faith. So you will find pastors that are just ignorant about the faith, maybe not as well educated. I think more often than not, you're going to find what I like to call fifth column priests, or priests that know the teachings of the faith and just don't care and will preach or tell people opposite of that. And I think clearly we've had this problem. We've had this problem forever. If you look at the biggest heresies in church history, they were always started by a priest. So Luther, Pelagius, Arius, some of these were bishops, but Luther wasn't a bishop, of course. But a lot of the heresies were created by priests. So whether they were ignorant of the faith or they were just kind of like change agents, but you will find priests that know the teaching of the church and they just flagrantly disregard it. And then even worse is they will tell parishioners about that and teach error, intentional error. And this reminds me what Jesus says about how, woe to those who cause my little ones to sin. It's better to have a millstone wrapped around, thrown in the sea. There is a higher expectation for the ordained than for the common man and woman. And that's why we do have a lot of episodes here. I would say a lot, but we do have episodes about like, be careful when you go to a parish, and definitely vet it. Per canon law, we do not have to go to the parish that's in our neighborhood. You can go to one that is more to your liking. And unfortunately, you will find priests that are heterodox, that are openly heterodox. And I have an episode here, the 2 qualities you should look for in a priest, because some people will be like, I don't like this priest because he's brusque, or I don't like this priest because maybe his homilies are boring or something. It's like, none of that really matters in the long run. What matters is, are they orthodox? And I don't mean schismatic orthodox. I mean, are they, for lack of a better phrase, towing the party line? Are they adhering 100% to magisterial teaching? That's really the only thing that matters, or I should say that's the paramount thing that matters. And so if you go in with low expectations and just understand, there's a lot of, I would say there's a lot of either misinformed priests, or yes, there's a lot of change agent modernist priests. Then when you encounter priests who are actually orthodox, and we haven't talked about the moral parts of this, because there are going to be priests that are failing in that regard. Either they're fornicating, whether it be homosexual or heterosexual, or maybe they're embezzling money from the church or engaging in behavior that's not great. That's similar to this. But if you just kind of have the expectation, like, there's some bad priests, then when you encounter a good priest, you're like, great, and you're even more like, you have more gratitude that you actually found a priest that teaches the faith, and if they have high moral integrity and they're great in the pulpit and they have a lot of confessional hours, then like, this is great, and then you should really want to kind of cling to that parish and go to that pastor and so forth. But I see so many people just having way high expectations regarding their priest, and then they're just devastated when they find out that their priest is teaching something that's bad. And look, when it comes, if you do have a priest who is either doing something wrong in the Mass that makes the Mass invalid, heaven forbid invalid, or even illicit, or he is giving advice that is obviously contrary to the faith, or he's preaching that the miracles of Jesus didn't really exist or anything, you have to be careful that you don't put the holier than thou kind of thing. So we all have the right to contact our bishop and let our bishop know. But once the bishop knows, and I would, honestly, if you feel comfortable, talk to the priest about whatever error that they're teaching. Kind of like what Jesus says, go and talk to him, then bring somebody and then take it to the church. But if you don't feel comfortable talking to the priest about it, then, talk to the bishop, file a report with the bishop, and then kind of let it go. You've done your due diligence, and you just have to let it go. But in general, I just think if we have low expectations, especially with our spouse, I mean, we haven't really done a dating Catholic marriage episode in quite some time, but having excessively high expectations for your spouse is like you're doomed to have a bad marriage, because people are flawed. People are flawed, and we're all on our kind of like our journey to hopefully be the best that we could be. And so when it comes to kind of pivotal people in your life, like your pastor, maybe your boss, and other things, I just think it's best to have low expectations. And when it comes to priests, yeah, I mean, look, you have a difficult job, and that's just why people pray for priests all the time. You have a difficult job, but I pray that any priest that doesn't agree with the church's teachings, it's all a question of humility. We talk about the sin on the far left and the sin on the far right of the church is excessive pride, right? I know better. And look, newsflash, you don't know better. We have to parrot what the church teaches, the church founded by Jesus Christ, that's protected in error. We don't know better. So any priest that would, heaven forbid, be listening to this episode, you don't know better. You're being disobedient and conform to the church's teaching. And if you're just in open disobedience, then I would consider maybe leaving the vocation in general, because you are causing people to sin, especially if you're openly teaching error and bad things. You're leading people astray, and it's just better for you just to not be a priest and than to continue to teach error. Guys, post in the comments. Let me know if you agree, disagree, to have low expectations for the priest. Post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.